It hits you when you're stuck in traffic, doesn't it? For something as vital as our roads or bridges, you'd think we'd have it figured out. But get this, only about, what, half of state transportation projects actually finish when they say they will? Just half.
Yeah, that's a pretty staggering statistic.
It really makes you wonder, why is it so incredibly hard to get these essential projects done on schedule?
It's more than just an annoyance, right? Those delays, they create this whole domino effect. Budgets can balloon. Sometimes quality even takes a hit if people start rushing. And ultimately, it's the communities, it's the folks driving those roads every day who feel the impact.
Totally. And that's exactly what we're diving into today. We've got our hands on this really interesting report from the University of South Carolina. It's called the SPR 721 Revised Final Report.
Okay.
It was done for the South Carolina DOT and the Federal Highway Administration.
And they looked at a huge amount of data, over 2,000 transportation projects just in South Carolina, really trying to get under the hood of how project scheduling works, or sometimes doesn't work. They focus specifically on this thing called the critical path method, CPM.
Right, CPM. And this report is just packed with details. Looking at that many projects gives you a much clearer picture, beyond just one-off stories. You see the bigger trends.
Definitely. And, even if you listening aren't in the construction world, these ideas about planning, about risk, where things go wrong,
Yeah.
they apply almost anywhere, really, any big project you might tackle.
So that's our mission for this deep dive. We want to unpack this report, dig into South Carolina's experience, and try to answer some big questions like, does using the CPM thing actually make projects more successful? On time, on budget? What causes the delays we all hate? And can we get any better at predicting them?
Okay, so maybe we should start with the basics for anyone not familiar. What is this critical path method, the CPM?
Good idea. Um, think about planning a really big event, like a wedding or something. Lots of moving parts. Some things absolutely have to happen before others can start. You need the venue before you book the band, right?
Makes sense.
CPM is kind of like that, but scaled up for these massive construction projects. It breaks everything down into individual tasks, figures out the sequence, what depends on what, and crucially, it identifies the critical path. Those are the tasks where any delay immediately pushes back the entire project finish date. It's about seeing those crucial links.
Yeah, it's a powerful technique. It really emerged back in the 1950s, and it's become pretty standard as construction got more complex. The report notes it's a big leap from just, say, a basic timeline or a Gantt chart, which might show tasks but doesn't always highlight those critical dependencies quite so clearly. CPM really shows how a slip in one area can cascade.
Okay, now here's where the South Carolina story gets particularly interesting based on this report. They pinpoint a key change around 2007. That's when the SCDOT, the state's Department of Transportation, started mandating CPM scheduling, but specifically for their high-risk, more complex projects.
Ah, okay. So they didn't require it for everything, just the tricky ones.
Exactly. And the researchers used that split. They looked at a bunch of projects before 2007 and a bunch after 2007.
And the change in how often CPM was used is, well, it's pretty dramatic. Before that 2007 mandate, in the projects they analyzed, only about 22% used CPM. After 2007, that figure jumped way up over 55%. That's a major shift in practice.
A huge jump. But, it's not just if they used it. The report also dug into what the contractors themselves thought about it. Apparently, something like 2/3 of contractors said they prepare CPM schedules anyway, even if the contract doesn't strictly require it. Which sounds positive, right?
It does, on the surface. But here's a bit of a wrinkle they found. When they surveyed these contractors, about 3/4 of them admitted they actually keep a separate internal schedule, one that's different from the official CPM schedule they submit to the DOT.
Oh, okay, that's interesting.
It raises questions, doesn't it? Like, how much is that official schedule really guiding the day-to-day work if they have their own internal one? And maybe even more telling, only about 1/3 of the contractors felt CPM was a highly valuable tool for actually delivering the project successfully.
Wow, only 1/3. That seems like a disconnect if you're going through the effort of making these detailed plans.
You'd think they'd find them more useful, yeah. The report also gives some national context. Apparently, almost all state DOTs, like 96%, use CPM in some capacity. And the main triggers for requiring it are, just like South Carolina post-2007, project complexity and risk. And the software tools are pretty standard. Primavera, Microsoft Project, those are the big ones.
Okay, so CPM is definitely widespread, especially for the bigger, riskier jobs. Which leads us to the million-dollar question. Does it actually work? Does it lead to better outcomes?
And this is where the South Carolina data gets, let's say, complicated.
Mm.
or nuanced.
All right, let's get into it. They compared the CPM projects versus the non-CPM ones, both before and after that 2007 change. Looking at delays beyond the original date, delays beyond any adjusted dates because plans change and the average time lost to delays, and the first glance is a bit surprising.
It really is. So in that after 2007 data set, remember, when CPM was required for high-risk projects, those projects with CPM actually had a slightly higher rate of delays past the original completion date, and their average initial delays were longer too.
Wait, higher delays with CPM?
Initially, yes. But here's the twist. When they looked at delays beyond the adjusted completion date after official changes and time extensions, the CPM projects actually had a slightly lower rate of delay, and the average delay after adjustment was a bit shorter.
Huh. So, worse initially, but maybe slightly better at managing delays once they happen and get factored in.
That seems to be what the data suggests for that period. It's puzzling, though, isn't it? You'd expect the more planned projects to do better from the start. And interestingly, the report mentions that in the before 2007 data, the trend for initial delays was kind of the opposite.
Okay, this is where my head starts spinning a bit.
Well, and the report makes a really crucial point here. We have to remember why CPM was being used, especially after 2007. It was mandated for the riskier, more complex projects. The non-CPM projects were generally simpler, lower risk to begin with. So comparing them directly is maybe not entirely fair. It's like comparing apples and oranges, or maybe apples and, I don't know, hand grenades.
Huh. Okay, that's a vivid way to put it. So, inherent risk is a huge factor. Did they try to control for that by looking at specific types of projects?
They did. They zoomed in on things like bridge projects, general construction, asphalt paving, and after 2007, for those specific types, they found that using CPM was statistically linked to longer average delays past the original completion date.
Longer delays again, even within specific types. Wow.
Yeah, for those particular categories, looking at that initial deadline. So having the CPM didn't necessarily prevent those initial overruns on some complex job types.
But was there anywhere CPM seemed to help? Any bright spots?
There was an interesting finding for short-duration projects, those under 6 months. For those quick jobs, the ones without CPM actually ended up having longer average delays after the completion date was adjusted, compared to similar short projects with CPM.
Okay, so maybe for shorter, less complex projects where it wasn't required, choosing to use CPM might have actually helped manage things better when hiccups occurred.
That could be an interpretation, yeah. It suggests maybe there's value even on simpler projects for managing those inevitable adjustments.
Did they see differences across, say, different regions in South Carolina? Or based on the sheer size or cost of the project?
They ran statistical tests, tie tests, looking for significant differences across SEDO2 districts, project sizes, durations, and there were some variations. For instance, after 2007, smaller projects with CPM tended to have shorter delays after the adjusted date. But overall, the picture was mixed. It wasn't like CPM was universally better or worse across the board. It really depended on the context.
So it sounds like CPM is definitely not some kind of silver bullet for preventing delays. What other factors did the report find that contribute to projects running late?
Well, they looked at the usual suspects: project type, location size, plan duration.
Yeah.
But just looking at simple correlations didn't show really strong, straightforward links to delays. However, they used a more sophisticated technique, logistic regression, to model the probability of delay. And one factor popped out as statistically significant:
Which was?
a higher total bid amount. Basically, the more expensive the project was predicted to be initially, the higher the likelihood it would end up delayed.
Okay, that makes intuitive sense, I suppose. Bigger budget often means more complexity, more steps, more potential pitfalls.
Exactly. More moving parts, more things that can go wrong.
What about the budget itself? Did CPM affect whether projects finished within their original cost estimate?
Yeah, they ran a similar model for budget performance.
Mm-hmm.
And this is also pretty interesting. It suggested that using CPM and also having a longer planned project duration were both linked to a decreased likelihood of finishing within budget.
Decreased. So using CPM made it less likely to be on budget.
According to their model, yes. And again, this probably ties back to CPM being used on those inherently riskier, more complex projects where cost overruns might be more likely anyway. The specific SCDOT district was also a significant factor for budget performance.
This is fascinating, but it does feel like predicting these things is incredibly tough. Did the researchers try any, I don't know, more cutting-edge approaches to prediction?
They did. This is where they ventured into text mining and neural networks, which is pretty innovative for this kind of study.
Text mining, so analyzing the actual words used in project documents.
Precisely. They took a massive amount of text comments from change orders, notes from daily work reports, and fed it into computers. The idea was to see if the language used could hold clues about potential delays.
What did they find in all that text?
Well, they identified the most frequent keywords. No huge surprises there. Days, contract date, completion date, change order, the kinds of terms you'd expect. They also did sentiment analysis, trying to gauge the positive or negative tone. Work tended to be associated with positive sentiment, while delay, unsurprisingly, was the most negative.
Okay, so they quantified the language. How did they use that to predict delays with AI?
Kind of, yeah. They used this text data, along with other factors like whether CPM was used, as inputs for a neural network. That's a type of AI good at finding complex patterns. They trained it to predict whether a project would be delayed or not.
And how well did the AI do? What was the accuracy?
It came out around 53.7% accurate.
53.7. So
That's right.
barely better than flipping a coin.
Pretty much. It really underscores just how difficult predicting delays accurately can be, even with these advanced techniques applied to real-world data.
So the crystal ball is still pretty cloudy. Did they look at it from a more traditional statistical angle too, like patterns and past delays?
Yes, they did. They used historical project data to fit probability distributions to completion times. Think of it like creating a statistical map of how likely different lengths of delays are based on past experience. It gives you a more realistic view than just relying on a single estimated finish date.
Right, because reality is messy. Did they find a consistent pattern, a single distribution that fit well?
Not perfectly for all projects, no. Mainly because a decent chunk do finish on time, which skews things, so they handled it cleverly. They fitted separate distributions, one for the projects that were delayed and another for the ones that finished early.
Ah, okay, different patterns for different outcomes.
Exactly. For the delayed projects, a pattern called the Pearson-6 distribution seemed to fit the data best. For the early finishers, it was something called the Johnson-SB distribution.
And what did these probability patterns reveal? What are the odds, basically?
But one key takeaway was that roughly 1 in 4 SCDOT projects is likely to be delayed longer than the historical average delay. And they calculated that average delay to be about 36.6% beyond the original planned duration. That's quite significant.
Wow, a 36% overrun is the average delay, and a quarter of projects go even longer than that.
Yeah. And they also calculated the probabilities of delays hitting other thresholds, like being 5% late, 10% late, 20% late, and so on. This kind of probabilistic info is potentially really useful for risk assessment.
Absolutely, it moves beyond just, will it be late, to how late might it realistically be.
Exactly. It helps set more realistic expectations and maybe plan contingencies better.
Okay, so wrapping this all up, after going through mountains of data, CPM analysis, text mining, probabilities, what were the big takeaways? What did the report ultimately recommend?
I think the main conclusion is that the link between using CPM and project success is, well, it's complex. It's not a guaranteed fix. Its effectiveness really seems to hinge on the context of the project.
Right. It's not magic. It's a tool, and how you use it and when you choose to use it matters a lot.
Precisely. And that leads into one of their key recommendations. SCDOT should adopt a more systematic, methodical way to decide which projects actually need CPM. They pointed to Virginia's DOT as an example, suggesting a multi-criteria approach, looking at complexity, any major constraints, the level of uncertainty, and importantly, the consequences if things do get delayed.
That sounds much more nuanced than just, is it high risk? Really digging into why it might be risky.
Exactly. They also suggested considering other factors like combinations of bid amount and duration, the number of different bid items, if there are unique or especially challenging activities like managing heavy traffic during construction.
Makes sense. What else?
Another interesting suggestion was about the schedules themselves. Instead of just putting single point estimates for how long each task will take, incorporate a range of possible durations. Build that uncertainty right into the schedule.
Acknowledge the fuzziness up front. I like that.
Yeah, probabilistic scheduling. And finally, they circle back to that issue of contractors keeping separate internal schedules. The strong recommendation was to require schedules that are cost and resource loaded. That means the schedule links tasks not just to time, but also to the money and the resources, people, equipment needed.
Ah, so it makes the official schedule much more comprehensive and presumably more useful for actually managing the job day to day.
That's the idea. It gives everyone a clearer, shared picture. And the ultimate goal, the final recommendation, is really about alignment, ensuring that the DOT and the contractor are actually using the same schedule as the primary tool for managing the project. No secret side schedule.
Got it. So, to recap for everyone listening, CPM, this critical path method, it's a standard tool, especially for complex projects, but the data shows it's not a simple guarantee of success. Its impact is really nuanced.
Right. And predicting delays is hard, maybe harder than we'd like, even with AI. But looking at historical data through probabilities can offer really valuable insights into risk.
And the recommendations focus on being smarter about when to use CPM, building uncertainty into plans, and making sure everyone is genuinely working off the same playbook.
It really brings home that good project management isn't just about the software or the chart. It's about careful selection of methods, realistic risk assessment, and crucially, clear communication and alignment between everyone involved.
It really does, and it leaves you with a final thought, doesn't it? If even with sophisticated tools like CPM and all this analysis, delays are still so common. What are the deeper issues? Are there fundamental human factors or maybe systemic problems in how we approach these huge undertakings that are the real hurdles? What are those unexpected curveballs that seem to derail even the most meticulously planned projects? Something to chew on.
Definitely something to think about. And if this has piqued your interest, you might want to look up more on the critical path method itself, or maybe project risk management in general. And of course, the full report, SPR 721, is out there if you really want to dive deep.